Micah Thomas, how you doing?
Good. How about you?
I'm doing all right. Yeah, we were doing a little chit-chatting before and just talking a little bit about how it's been a year. It's been a year of this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you had said something about your intention to move back to New York sometime. How have things been for you over this last year?
Well, I mean, I had to finish up Juilliard first of all, and as you know, Zoom over schools is can be hell on earth.
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's just you know how it is. The screen for 5 hours a day is kind of definitely wears on you. But
Yeah.
I'm lucky that I love my parents, I love my family. I have there's a nice house. I'm fortunate. So just trying to figure out this is definitely not where I expected to be after graduating from college. But
Great.
try to keep busy, try to do whatever I can with the time.
So have you been writing, and I know you've been practicing a lot.
Well, I actually have chronic arm pain for the past 2, maybe and a half years now. Yeah. Yep. So, when this started, I actually took, I think, a month off from playing, and then I went back, eased back into it, and there's some things that I wouldn't have been able to do if I hadn't had this time. So that was nice. But yeah, I practice, but I think I've been doing more writing. Like,
Okay.
I wrote like maybe 11 tunes so far. I went like on a spree when it first started, and whatever I had the energy and to do.
So, how is your writing process? What was that like?
I'm still trying to figure that out.
Me too.
Oh yeah.
It keeps changing.
Yeah, same. Yeah, it's been changing very rapidly. Because when I was, I'm definitely a better improviser than a writer, and I'm definitely playing catch up with the writing. That's how I feel. So like, when I was in high school, I would just try to write something, and then when I started getting my first leader gigs, I was like, okay, I'm not that great of a writer in my eyes. I got to like figure out how to make good songs. So I would take like 3 or 4 songs that I liked and kind of take elements from them kind of methodically and like piece them together. And that was what I was doing for a second. And then I started not liking it, which, it was educational for me, but I grew out of it. And now I kind of I'll take a theme or a motive or something, and I'll just kind of run with it very improvisationally, like piece it together like a puzzle. So, yeah, trying out different ways,
In your practicing, first I want to hear about this chronic arm pain.
Yeah.
And how do you sort of work around that?
Man, I mean, it's been such a learning process. Because the way it started was I had Dizzy's club in New York has like week-long gigs, and I had a thing, and my second night I started feeling this tingling pain here, and by the 4th night I couldn't even get through the whole, like 45 minutes in, like there was a jam session afterwards. I was like, you got to take this. Like I can't play any longer. And I've never had any problems before this. And that was 2018. Like November 2018 that happened. I've tried a bunch of stuff, man. Like I saw a physical therapist. I saw a couple of physical therapists. They both gave me things that were very somewhat helpful, but nothing nothing life changing. There's this book by John Sarno, Healing Back Pain, that a lot of people talk about, where he talks about how a lot of things are, oh my gosh, what's the word? Like psychosomatic. It's like they're how like a lot of things are psychosomatic.
Right.
There's definitely a degree with that with me because I'm a very stress, induced person. So, and apparently that can cause all sorts of stuff. But in the end, the thing that's helped me most is number one, just getting used to it and realizing that I have it and I'm still here playing music, so I don't have to be scared of it. And number two, just really dealing with my posture.
I was going to ask you about that. Do you think that you said that you stress induced or stress has an effect on your body? It seems that's what you mean. Does it seem like when you're more relaxed, intentionally relaxed, you have less issues with it, or you can play longer?
I think so. More like preparing my body to be in a position where it is naturally relaxed,
Right.
Spending a lot of time. I used to have terrible posture, like hunchback. I used to play with the bench very low, so like my arms were like here. So eventually I was just like, okay, I'm going to get to the point where because man, it's piano. It shouldn't be. This is not like even drums or trumpet or, something where, this. I don't really think playing piano should be physically stressful at all. And that's what some people told me. So I'm like, okay, I got to get my body to the point where there is no stress naturally, because there really shouldn't be, in my opinion. And so, yeah.
So in one way, it seems that piano is, I think it's, as you said, I mean, it shouldn't take that much effort to play piano. But on another, but it seems to me that the players that are not, where it's not a lot of effort, are players that are physically very strong.
Like who are you thinking about?
Well, my favorite piano player is Kenny Kirkland.
Okay.
And his right hand is incredibly strong.
Right.
Right. I mean, he couldn't play any of that stuff with the kind of feel and bounce that he gets off of that stuff. That just incredible, even awkward to play stuff. I mean, and it seems to me that he just is, in order to play that way, it seems to me that he's probably physically strong. And I'm not saying that to say that he's pounding the piano.
Right, he's not.
I don't know. He might have been, but that's not the point. I'm saying
not as much as some other people.
Yeah, right. I'm saying that because he has so much strength, it didn't take any effort or very much effort to do it. That's what I mean. Yeah.
And my physical therapist was actually like, these muscles are like so much more developed than like the rest of them, and he said that was normal for a pianist. Like, I'll look at videos of myself and like, this will be like, you can see veins and it looks really thick. And I'm like, that's really funny because, like I haven't really gotten into, I did weights for a second, but I think I did them wrong or something. And I just kind of was like, what, let's, I mean, I know who I'm talking to. So
yeah, you're gonna end up looking like Popeye.
Right. Well, there's no danger of that happening, but
well, no. I mean, if you look at the cartoon, right? So Popeye has these like really skinny biceps, but then he's got like huge forearms.
Right. Okay. Yeah, for sure, exactly.
until he eats his spinach, and then it's still not a match. Right. The forearms are still, like he's not going to win any bodybuilding competitions.
I forgot about this. Wow. Sorry, this is random, but I just, Bugs Bunny has really saved me a few times during this pandemic.
You mean just like watching cartoons and stuff?
Yeah, like Bugs Bunny's great.
Yeah, I'm a real loony. Thank you so much for watching my video so far.
If you'd like to support, there are several ways to do so below. Also, likes are free. Please comment, share, and subscribe. Now back to the video.
I'm a real Looney Tunes. I mean, my two favorite cartoons, and my son he's into this too. He digs them too. He really likes Teen Titans Go a lot.
Okay.
Which is very silly.
Yeah. Is it Cartoon Network or
Cartoon Network?
Yeah. Okay.
But the two cartoons that are my favorite, and he also likes them a lot. It's Looney Tunes, so that whole collection of stuff, including Bugs Bunny and everything. He likes the Rooster, yeah. I mean this. There's so many great characters there. What the heck? All right, that was just random, but it's Looney Tunes and Tom and Jerry.
Yeah, Tom and Jerry's great.
Yeah, I mean, and the stuff is very much, especially of course Tom and Jerry is very physical comedy. Yeah. And he also likes, my son also really likes, there's a cartoon that's on Netflix called Booba.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like this weird looking creature. He's white and they're very short. The episodes are very short and there's no talking. It's all physical humor, and he's trying to eat stuff, and he's trying to eat stuff he's not supposed to eat, and yeah, it's good stuff. But yeah, I've been a fan of cartoons for all my life, and a lot of it is because the music, especially in Looney Tunes and like Tom and Jerry, the music's incredible. Yeah,
and it also just the physical. I mean, honestly, I haven't been paying much attention to music, but the physical stuff also feels very, like it feels like Roy Haynes and Charlie Parker, like just them ducking and dodging, and it's like.
Right. All right. So can you talk a little bit about some of the creative projects that you've been involved with?
Yeah. Well, I've been fortunate to be involved in a few bands. Like I got my own trio. I'm in Emmanuel Wilkins's quartet and Gifton Jones quintet. Yeah, and I feel super lucky to be in, it's such an enriching experience to be involved in any band, let alone three. And each of them, like Emmanuel's, I think he's starting to pick up recently, but
yep.
Yeah, just watching each of those things grow. And then I haven't played with my trio in more than a year, but actually we do have a gig coming up the 24th in New York, but just something. But yeah, it's been really great, trying to figure out how to have my voice in those three different settings, and then everything else, all the other sideman stuff.
Now, with the bands these three bands that you're talking about, how did you meet the personnel, the people that are in the bands?
Mostly. Well, Emmanuel and I went to Juilliard together. Yep. And, Emmanuel, grew up with Daryl, the bass player, and Emmanuel and Kwaku, we're all in New York, Then, it's a pretty small, not a small, it's a small place for sure. And the scenes get insular, so we all run into each other,
Right.
And same with Gifton's band was at one point. Gibson's still trying to figure out personnel, but it was a bunch of it was Juilliard crew,
Right. So the way we met was, let's see here, we would have met prior to maybe your sophomore year in high school or something, and you came to the jazz camp at Ohio State.
Yeah.
But it seems like we had met prior to that, some kind of way. I don't remember. But and then we've played together, in the Columbus Jazz Orchestra several times. The last time we played together, we did one of those live streamed concerts from the Jazz Arts Academy. And what was it like? It was me and Byron Stripling, you, Andy Woodson, and who was playing drums? Was it Zach? It must have been. Huh?
I don't think there was a drummer, if I'm remembering correctly.
There was no drummer on that one?
I don't think so. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't remember a drummer.
Oh yeah, you know what? I think you're right. I think you're right because I did something else that was one of these live streamed events. I have to say I prefer playing for an audience.
Of course. Yeah.
And
yeah.
I really don't. I'm not going to complain because without the technology that we have, I mean, we wouldn't be talking like this, and without all the live streaming concerts, there's, those gigs paid, so I'm not complaining.
Right.
I'm just saying that there is a preference for real people in the room.
I don't think I would be surprised if anyone disagreed with you.
Right. I don't know. Some folks are pretty. I've heard. And now, granted, I realize that if you end up in a certain kind of situation, it's probably not the best thing to sort of keep saying a bunch of negative things about it, because it's just going to make you feel worse. You're not going to, that's not going to help anything. But some folks have kind of taken this to the next level, where, I'm a minister of music at Second Baptist Church.
Okay.
In town here, and I've played in churches for a lot of years, and I know a lot of pastors, and some of my pastor friends would be like, oh yeah, this is better than it was, because there are a few churches where the virtual, doing services virtually actually didn't impact the income for the church.
Okay.
Most churches have been very much affected, but there are a few churches that have not.
Wow.
And of some of those,
all right. Well, what is the fact? Do you know what the factor would be? Like the size, or?
Well, that's a tough question. That's a somewhat complicated question. So, for instance, and this is why it's complicated. At Ohio State, and I know this seems like I'm not talking about the same thing, but at Ohio State, we've been very much impacted, and income has gone way down because students have said, you know what, I'm pressing pause until this is over, and then I'll come back to school, right?
Okay, like taking leave.
Yeah, I mean, once a student, always a student. So, if and I think the institution also sort of has been more lenient with students, because they understand, like, you're paying all this tuition. Do you really want to be sitting in front of a screen? It seems to me that would be less expensive, like 1/10 of what I'm paying, that kind of thing.
Right.
But Ohio State is huge, right? Mm-hmm. And, but, it has been pretty profoundly impacted by what's going on. Whereas there are some smaller schools, like way smaller, that weren't impacted very much at all, and or maybe actually doing better.
Wow.
Right now, that's not intuitively obvious. It seems like it would be the opposite. Well, they're so big, they got money to burn. They'll be all right. This kind of thing. But actually, it's been quite impactful. It's same thing with like churches. If you have a church and say it's a mega church, and say the mega church has 5,000 seats in the auditorium, right, in sanctuary, 5,000 seats. So if you can't get people to come, it seems that it's less likely that people are going to want to probably give, right? Because they're not there. Wow. And then there's a sense of anonymity if you're just watching services on the computer, right? So you have all of those kinds of factors that I think actually hurt institutions that are bigger as opposed to ones that are smaller. The church I'm working at, it's been a net zero. Okay. But it's a small church. Right. And so I think people feel like, hey, the church is depending on me. I need to keep doing what I was doing before. And that kind of thing. So it's not intuitively obvious, but
when you say
I think that's part of it.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about. I'm going to tell you. We were talking about your the chronic arm pain, and I'm going to tell you I've had some issues myself.
Oh yeah. Shoot.
Yeah. So I've had issues. Well, first of all, I've had a lot of issues with my shoulders. Okay. I had surgery on this shoulder, and this has got I've got metal parts in there and stuff. It's my bionic arm.
Wow.
And this arm feels great. Like it's like nothing can hurt that arm. But I have there's like this symmetry kind of thing. And I was talking to the surgeon. And she was talking about how so I'm claustrophobic, and in order to get the surgery I had to do an MRI.
Oh yeah.
And years and years and years ago I had an MRI, but also for shoulders. They were looking at my shoulders, and then I ended up getting some shots and stuff, and eventually the shots started to help. But one of those MRIs, it was about 30 minutes in, and then something just clicked in my head. And this was about probably 10 years ago. Something clicked in my head, and I was like, I got to get out of here right now. And from then on, I developed like pretty intense like claustrophobia.
Is that where it started?
That's where it started. Wow. It was like something clicked, and then all of a sudden I was just claustrophobic.
And you were fine before?
I was fine before. I mean, getting on planes and all that stuff even bothered me.
Oh, now planes bother you?
Planes bother me. Getting on elevators. People sitting too close to me. I'm like really sensitive to heat. So like if I'm really warm-blooded, so I like it cool. If it starts to get a little bit warm, then I want people to stand a little bit further away from me.
Wow, that was quite a switch.
Yeah. It's just like this. Now, it's gotten a lot better over the last few years, and I started to realize that it was probably a combination of things. and I was having some issues with anxiety, and I think that sort of was the beginnings of that.
Okay.
You know, and then once I started to realize that, then I started doing a few things differently, and that's helped a lot. But I said all of that to say, you know, I've had some issues with my shoulders, and at first, with my left shoulder in particular, with the way that, you know, when I'm playing bass, my left hand was going to sleep. Right, so all the tingling and everything, I'm still playing. I'm in the middle of playing, and then just completely numb and tingling. Right, and then I'm like, you know, okay. And it wasn't my whole hand. It was like, yeah, it was these three. It was these three fingers. So it would be on that side. I was like, what the heck is going on?
Mine is on the opposite side.
So I was like, what is going on? These three fingers. And then sometimes I get a little bit of my ring finger, but mostly it was these three fingers. I was like, what the heck is going on? And I was really concerned about it, of course.
Right.
Because that's how I make my money. Yeah. You know, it's playing music. And so, you know, I was hoping it wasn't carpal tunnel.
Right. Yeah.
You know, because if it's carpal tunnel, that's not going to be a good thing.
Right.
I didn't want to have to get surgery for that, and there's no guarantee that that's, you know, it's a pretty good likelihood that the surgery will help.
Yeah, okay.
You know, for carpal tunnel, if that was what it was. But I discovered what it was actually was that because of issues in my shoulder, the nerve was getting pinched in my shoulder, and that's what was cutting off circulation to my hand, and that's why my hand was falling asleep.
Yeah.
And then I started having issues. I've had like tendonitis in both hands, but it was weird stuff that was triggering it. Like, for instance, I noticed in my left hand I was getting, you know, tendonitis in this part of my hand, and when I first started noticing it was when I was clutching my motorcycle.
Okay.
Right? So I didn't notice it any other time. It didn't affect any playing or anything like that, but clutching my motorcycle, it was like fire.
That sounds so psychosomatic, man.
Right. So, and I was like, what the heck is going on here?
Right.
So then, you know, on the off season with the motorcycle, you know, I don't ride, and then my hands are totally fine. Okay. So I've had you know, that kind of stuff.
Wow.
And the latest thing that I've had, which was due to medication, it was caused by medication, statin drugs. So I take cholesterol medication. It's like there's it's just, I just have I'm predisposed to high cholesterol. Okay. And, you know, I do all the things that they say you're supposed to do, fish oil and all of the natural stuff. And I work out, you know, I'm in the gym 5 days a week and all like that. And matter of fact, when I would talk to my doctor about it, she was like, "Man, you're working out so much. Why is your cholesterol so high?" So you know, they put me on cholesterol medication. And at first I think it was like Lipitor or something. And but they didn't also tell me that I need to supplement CoQ10.
Okay.
And so I started developing really like bad tendonitis in my forearms.
You've been through a lot.
Well, it's not that bad actually. I'm pretty old, so so this stuff didn't happen all in the same week or anything. But you know, so I was having tendonitis in my elbows and in my forearms, and I was like, man, what the heck is going on? And I was going to a chiropractor, and the chiropractor was telling me, you know, and he asked me if I was on statin drugs, and I was like, yeah. He says, well, yeah, that's why you have tendonitis. And I was like, what? He says, yeah, start taking CoQ10, and after you've followed the directions and taken a bottle, you know, like by the time that a bottle is gone, you'll start feeling better. And I did that, and I started feeling better. and now I have like no tendonitis in my forearms. Some of the stuff that happens from chronic activity, what happens is lactic acid. You get a lactic acid buildup.
Okay.
And that promotes inflammation. And then the CoQ10 is what actually pushes out the inflammation. And so if you're on something that blocks that,
yeah,
so then you don't get the benefit of that. So then the lactic acid basically just sits in places, that you have inflammation is worse. Yeah. But whenever I hear people talk about like sort of chronic pain associated with your repetitive motion, I always suggest CoQ10, and then some kind of like glucosamine or something like that.
Okay.
No, I'm not a doctor.
This one thing.
CoQ10?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a CO dash Q, then the number 10.
Cool. Okay. That's
but yeah, I mean, so you can try it and see if it helps.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I'll add it to the long list of things I've tried.
Yeah. Have you tried any glucosamine?
No, I haven't tried any medication besides pain.
Glucosamine with chondroitin, and this stuff, the stuff that I'm telling you about right now, this is natural stuff.
Okay.
So you can go to Walgreens or something and and grab a bottle. But there are different formulas of glucosamine with chondroitin. And so it's possible that one won't work very well, but another one will work great.
Right.
So it's the kind of thing you have to try a few different formulas, so to speak. There's some that have with sulfate, some of them, like I said, hydrochloride. So it's just but check that stuff out. Hopefully something, one of those things gives you some relief.
That would be amazing. Yeah, I'll let you know.
Yeah. Okay. So what does a practice routine look like? What kind of things are you working on? Like conceptually, you are. I mean, you're a great player. You're harmonically very dense, the kind of stuff that you play, and very a lot of moving parts, a lot of things happening at the same time.
Right.
A lot of independence in the stuff that's happening, all of that kind of stuff. What kinds of things do you work on to develop that?
And there was a period about 2 or 3 years ago that was really important to my development in terms of counterpoint, the moving parts, like you say, where I was like, okay, I want to be able to, the first step is for me to actually be able to hear different voices moving at the same time, because I couldn't. Like I had this awareness that there was this thing this sound I loved, but I couldn't comprehend what was going on, and I knew that it was possible. So what I did was, how those 4-part baccarals, right? I would go through those, but I would do this thing where I would learn each one. I would learn the soprano, and then I would learn the bass, and I would learn the alto and the tenor. And then I would put the sheet music away, and I would have to play all the 4 parts together.
Oh yeah, I see.
That took one chorale. The first chorale I did that way took like a week. So, and I did like 10 that way, and it was it took me like a month or 2 or something, but by the end I could hear stuff I couldn't hear before. Like I could hear different voices. So that was the first thing. And then once that was done, while I was doing that, I was also just always playing with counterpoint and just sounding terrible. And then after like 6 months, I started sounding okay. And, it was very experimental, now I just give myself, random exercises, sometimes it'll be, I'll sense an imbalance, like, maybe this part of my the bottom part of my left hand is sluggish, or maybe the bass isn't moving enough, or, maybe it's too dense. I have issues with the harmony being too dense, and for me, it's much trickier to play sparse counterpoint than dense counterpoint, So, just whatever variables, I can find, work on. The way I practice is very much, I listen to myself a lot and just kind of brainstorm what I need, what I want,
Yeah, I found in my own development that listening to myself has been critical.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's advice I give to my students. I talk about the 5 tools. 5 tools. In each of these tools is a mirror. Metaphorically, is a mirror. In other words, they're telling you the truth about you, right? They're inanimate. They're not aware.
Yeah.
Okay. So the 5 things. The first thing's a metronome.
Yeah.
Everybody, knows what a metronome is, but often is the case that folks don't get enough out of the metronome. So, for instance, a common way to practice is to practice with the metronome on every beat of the measure.
Uh-huh.
Okay. In jazz, often is the case that players will play with the metronome on 2 and 4 of a measure.
I really dislike that, man. 1 and 3 for me. Or I usually put it on like every 5 beats, or like every right. every 4 bars or something crazy. Anything.
Right, and that's where I'm going. So to try to spread out this sort of reliance on the metronome sort of dictating the time, and because really what you want it to do is you're basically checking your work with the metronome as opposed to. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's just a reference, and it's a mirror, right? It's telling you this is where you actually are. Right. I'm not making this up, man. I'm just telling you this is where that beat is in the measure, right? So this is what the metronome is doing. Mm-hmm. Second one, of course, is a tuner.
Yeah.
And
but yeah,
you don't have to worry about that. That's right. This is true unless you're a piano tuner also. Right. Is you have some tools. Hey, that one's a little bit out of time. But if you are even if you have perfect pitch, at some point your sense of perfect pitch had to be calibrated, right? It was calibrated by whatever the local music was.
Yeah.
So if I live in India or something, then that would be the way that it would be calibrated.
I see.
Right? If I'm, if I'm most other places in the world, then, probably something like A440 and well-tempered tuning and 12 notes and all of that.
But it wouldn't have been like that 400 years ago.
But it wouldn't have been that way 400 years ago. Exactly. I've even heard the situation where some folks with perfect pitch, well, not some folks, a lot of people with perfect pitch experience this, that at some point in their life, their sense of perfect pitch starts to change. It can actually even deepen.
Mine's gotten worse. Mine's gotten worse.
Really?
Yes. Mine has gotten worse.
So you have perfect pitch.
Yeah.
And when you say it's gotten worse, what do you mean exactly?
Well, I used to be able to tell you when things were sharp and flat. Now I'm pretty bad at that, honestly.
But you still know what the notes are.
I know what the notes are, but I mean, I'll be able to tell if it's, significantly sharp or flat, but I get confused a lot more than I used to.
Now, sometimes it is the case that people with perfect pitch don't develop certain relative pitch skills.
Yep. I cannot sing a song in a different key than the one I know it in, and other people can. And I'm like, how do you do that? That's like magical to me, because I end up not being able to sing songs because I have to go, falsetto. It's so annoying, and it may even, I wonder if you have relative pitch, it's easier to transpose stuff on your instrument. Like, I wonder. I mean, what do you have?
Yeah, right. So everybody is able to develop relative pitch, right? So you can develop that. So I'm starting to change my position on, or my thoughts on, the sort of range of pitch recognition have changed somewhat. Now, we know that beyond a certain age, you cannot develop perfect pitch. It's not possible.
Which age?
Beyond a certain age, well, it's got to be. Maybe it's like 7 or 8, maybe 9 or something like that. I think it's actually earlier than that.
Wow.
You cannot do it. It's not possible to develop it. It's something that is. So what it is that the part of your brain that can acquire that skill is still soft. It's still malleable when you're very young, and when you get beyond a certain age, that sort of crystallizes, so to speak, and then whatever's there, that's what's there. Wow. I interviewed Rick Beato. You know who that is?
Is that the guy who the son that can?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So he actually, now Rick does not have perfect pitch, but his son does, and his son, Rick, cultivated that ability in his son. In the room, and then when he was a really little kid, he's got this playlist called Neural. It's an app, but basically what it is just a playlist, and it's very dense.
High density music.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. That's right. And so basically what he tells you is, he says, look, if you want your kid to have perfect pitch, then you play this amount of time when they're below the age of whatever it is. But so he did a bunch of research to figure this out, and so he thought that perfect pitch would be an asset.
Right. Yeah.
And so he did that to so anyhow, but partially due to a lot of conversations that I've had, Bobby Floyd has perfect pitch, Dave Powers has perfect pitch. One of my best friends, actually I just did a live stream with him earlier today on my program called Thunder's Thoughts. His name's Doug Pierce. He's got perfect pitch. There's a long list of folks that I know. One of the guest artists for our jazz festival at Ohio State this year, Camille Thurman. I also interviewed her. She's got perfect pitch. The great singer, oh my goodness. I'll think of her name later. But there's been a number of folks that I've interviewed that have perfect pitch, and then also just people that I've collaborated with. And so I've asked a lot of different kinds of questions, and I've started to develop some views on how this thing works, and also grow to think that my ability to recognize pitch is not altogether something that anyone can learn. Now, I don't have perfect pitch, but I have something that is. So I used to think of it as an on or off proposition, right? It's like black or white. You either have perfect pitch or you don't have perfect pitch. Now I'm starting to think of it as more of a spectrum.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're further down in the spectrum, then you're not going to be able to just recognize pitches, on instruments like pianos. But if you're higher up on the spectrum, you can recognize pitches on maybe the instruments that you play. So for me, for instance, if someone is playing saxophone, flute, clarinet, I can hear every note that they're playing, and it could be detuned. They could be pushed in a quarter tone or something like that, or a whole half step. They could be pushed in. I'll tell you the notes that they're fingering. That's cool. Right?
But not with
I can hear. Say it again.
But not with piano or bass.
So it's interesting. So bass, I can there's certain tricks that you can do, right? So you can tell the difference in timbre, right? So if I'm further up the neck, of course you can hear that. If you're further down, you can down the neck, you can hear that. If you play an open string, you can hear that because it sounds different than anything else.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so there's ways to sort of so I'm sensitive to timbre, so I can sort of approximate within a certain range, and then obviously if you hear an open string, then then the whole thing's off. Right. You got it. But piano, I can't hear the notes on piano.
Man, you bring
I can approximate.
You bring up something interesting, which is that another way that it isn't like on and off is that like people think because I have perfect pitch, I know every note I hear. But like for example, I can hear certain types of harmony. Like I can hear jazz language harmony very well, but I had to learn how to hear like Wagner harmony, and I had to learn how to hear gospel harmony, and then I had to learn how to hear like certain I've checked out so much Charlie Parker that I know what he plays, but I couldn't recognize the melodies he was playing. So like I hope sorry to interrupt, but I was just to piggyback off that, like types of sounds and types of music you still have to like learn how to hear anyway. So that's another way where it's not black and white for me.
Yeah, so one way that I think perfect pitch is not the asset that we usually maybe give it credit for being is because if things are out of tune to a certain degree, it can be very distracting.
Yeah.
And or like if you sat down to a detuned piano. So say for instance, it's detuned like by a fourth.
Every note is detuned by a fourth?
Every note detuned by a fourth.
Yeah.
Would that bother you?
Well, it would be fun. I just wouldn't be. Yes, it would inhibit me from playing because I would be confused. Super confused.
Right. That's the usual thing that so I had a student, Wes Perry.
Oh yeah, I know.
Yeah, so he's got perfect pitch.
Okay.
And I was asking him about his whole perfect pitch journey.
Right.
And like, when did you discover that you had perfect pitch? And because often is the case that people with perfect pitch don't realize that they have perfect pitch, and they don't realize it for a while because they just assume that everyone else can perceive music the same way.
Right.
That
it's
they
hard
don't
to imagine a way where you don't, because it's like colors or anything else, words.
Yeah, and matter of fact, when I was talking to Camille, that was the case for her. She didn't realize that she could do something that other people couldn't do.
Yeah. Wow.
But what was I saying? I lost my train. Okay. So, we was talking about detuning the piano. Oh, good. So one thing I wanted to ask you is, when did you realize that you had perfect pitch?
Very early on, like, like I was like 2 or something, 1 or 2 years old, and my cousin played something on piano, and then she left and I played it back. And then like I would like the toilet would flush or a door would squeak, and I would be like, oh, that's that note. And my parents would be like, okay, you're definitely weird, and that's how I knew. Yeah. I never felt like I always knew. Yeah.
Yeah. I was talking to Doug Pierce, and I interviewed him also on this series, and he's one of the guys that he's one of my best friends, and he's got perfect pitch and all of that. And I was asking him about, like, every once in a while I would just ask him, like, I'd hear like a muffler or something. Okay, what's that note? It's a B. It's a little flat though. Stuff like that. Yeah. Just get a kick out of it. But like I said, I'm starting to see it as more of a spectrum and less of a sort of an on and off thing.
Yep.
But you can always improve your sense of relative pitch, but you cannot develop the ability to not need a frame of reference. Some of these ear training courses claim that you can learn absolute pitch or perfect pitch, but really what they're doing is they're teaching you how to memorize a note.
Okay.
And or how to use the atmosphere as a way to sort of key you in as to what a note might be. So like what is it, fluorescent lights or something, they emit a signal. I mean, if you are quiet enough and you can hear that note, or stuff like I'm sorry,
is it always the same note?
It's always the same note because of how the technology works. Wow. And right, but it's really faint. It's high. It's a high note, but it's that note. So if you can teach yourself to hear that note, but more often is the case is that people try to learn how to memorize a note. Mm-hmm. So if I can just always hear a B flat,
right?
The problem with that is that that's not perfect pitch.
Okay, yeah.
It's not perfect pitch to memorize a note, and right. then to base everything else on that note. That's a nice thing to do. I mean, that would be a good thing to do, but it's not perfect pitch.
Well, a lot of my students are like, do you think you can be a great musician if you don't have perfect pitch? I'm like, absolutely. Because I also know a lot of great musicians with perfect pitch,
Right.
So, yeah, I'm with you. It's not necessarily the be all end all.
See, what I do, if I hear some music and I'm like, there's no saxophone, flute, clarinet, or one of the instruments I can hear all the notes on, and sometimes something that happens too is in a section I stop being able to hear the timbre well enough to be able to do that. So if it's like a saxophone section, it becomes confusing. Like I know what all the notes are, but I can't. The stuff is being covered up. The overtones that I'm relying on to hear the notes are being covered up.
Yeah, I think for me a lot of the time. Yeah.
Yeah. But what was I saying?
You were saying what happens if you don't recognize, if you come across a section.
Oh, right. If there's not something that I clearly know what it is, I just make something up. I said, ba ba ba. That's going to be an F.
Yeah.
Ba ba. That'll be an F now. Yeah. And then I just build everything else on that. And then if I'm wrong, then I just transpose.
Right. It's fine. Yeah.
Right. But have there been aspects of your perfect pitch that, and I heard you saying that you're saying that it's getting worse, but are there aspects of it that that you've sort of tweaked that have gotten better, that you're maybe faster with?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I mean, like what I was telling you, like it might even be confusing for me to define the difference between developing perfect pitch and developing your ability to hear certain things, whether it be like, Charlie Parker, things that he does intervallically, things that Train and McCoy do intervallically, things that Wagner, and then like, those crazy gospel organists like Eddie Brown, they all have their like individual like harmonic tools. And I have to learn how to hear all of that stuff independently,
Right.
And so it's still like it feels very relative. Like you have to understand this universe and you have to understand this universe.
Yeah. So perfect pitch. It doesn't do the work for you, right? So it's like you recognize maybe you can hear what the notes are, but you still have to put them together.
Yeah. And then you hear about people like Sun Ra or Tyshawn Sawyer that have orchestral pitch. And, I haven't even touched that yet, but, it's so many acquired abilities,
Now, with listening to large ensembles, I spent a lot of time transcribing orchestration in just songs, different kinds of instrumentations and things. And so, in particular with an orchestra, I hear pretty well. I know how many. I can hear all I can hear all the parts.
Wow.
And I can hear when there's duplicate players on parts.
Wow. Right
so
on.
I can estimate how many players are actually playing. But that's from spending a lot of time listening to a lot of stuff and like transcribing a bunch of stuff. And then of course you get with something like that, you learn how to make educated guesses.
Yep.
Right, because you know what the tendencies are, how many players are going to tend to be in a certain kind of section.
Yeah. How different composers group different things.
Right, exactly. I mean, all that kind of stuff. And again, that's the kind of stuff that just hearing well is not going to help you with. That's like score study and talking to people that knew the composer and stuff like that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So it's hard work will still pay off.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, you sound better every time I hear you. So I mean, I know you're developing. You're
So I'm not sure.
You're thinking. All right. Well, okay. So, do you have any projects that you're working on, like maybe a recording? I know you said that you've got some compositions. Do you have a plan to maybe record these?
Yeah. I mean, I got this standards LP for this French label, this very small French LP label coming out, like I think in November.
Okay.
Yeah. But for my own stuff, I was thinking about like, I want to do like a solo free thing, like free improvisation mostly, but starting off with some basic like. Because, I was thinking during this pandemic, I still don't quite know what my musical thing is, but I know that there have been times where I felt very much myself while I'm playing. And I was like, what I need to do is I need to figure out when those times and places were. And I started making a list of the kind of places, I call them places where I felt at home, and started describing them. And I was like, okay, what if I like just focus on activating that in my playing, like with the minimum structure possible. So, and then I was like, what if I do a solo record? So that's one idea. Another idea is, do another trio record with the new compositions, which in my opinion are far better than, the ones that I released a year ago. Yeah. So yeah, I got a bunch of ideas for sure.
So I'm going to digress a little bit. So we got sidetracked a little bit with point number 2 of my 5 tools.
Yeah.
So number 3 is a recorder.
Yeah.
Video, audio, it's all of that, right? And I had said before that I tell my students frequently that the more that you listen to this yourself, the faster you can grow. And when you're listening to yourself, you have to get over that sort of initial response of hearing yourself, which sometimes can be sort of jarring.
Yeah.
It's like, ooh, that's what that sounds like.
Right.
That's what I sound like. It's kind of like the first time you made an outgoing message on your phone and you listen to it back and you're like, oh, I sound like a dork.
Right.
Yeah. But then you start to get used to hearing what you sound like, what your voice is like. And then you're like, okay, so that's what that sounds like. That's okay.
Yeah.
And then you start making, subtle refinements to maybe how fast you talk, or, maybe you're like, man, I sound like I need some more bass in my voice.
Yeah.
Let me try to talk with some, you start making those kind of adjustments. The same thing happens when you listen to yourself a lot when you're playing. Mm-hmm. On recordings and stuff. So I like to tell folks the story about Coltrane. Coltrane got kicked out of Miles's band. And when he got kicked out of his band, he signed a contract with Prestige. And when he was with Prestige, he was with them for 2 years. And he recorded 16 CDs worth of material. In that 2 years. It was a lot of standards. It's a great collection because it's a lot of standards. Most of those recordings were in his name, where he was the leader, but then he also recorded a lot with like label mates. And part of I always think that part of the reason it seems that he would have been that contract would have been so appealing is that they would let him record as much as he wanted to. Mm-hmm. And remember, in those days, this is before the camera phone.
Right. Yeah.
So you didn't have sort of recording machine just walking around with you all the time.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, I think he wanted to hear himself so that he could improve. He was also playing in Monk's band during that time period, and then he rejoined Miles's band. The rest is history, as they say. But that was sort of like a pressure cooker. Like he put himself in a situation where it's like, okay, I'm about to get it happening now. I just signed this contract. They're going to let me record as much as I want. Let's go.
And it was during that break that he kicked his drug habit?
Yeah. So, I don't actually know the exact time that happened.
I've been meaning to figure that out.
But it would make sense that if that was it, because that was essentially the reason that he got kicked out, right, is because, he just wasn't reliable. Some stuff was happening and he wasn't reliable, so he got kicked out. He used that 2 years to get some stuff together. I mean, you hear this, amazing trajectory in his playing over that time period. There's some great alto playing he does. He's playing with Freddie Hubbard. A couple of those recordings. There's a recording of him playing, I I think it's is he playing Invitation on alto?
Wow.
I don't remember, but there's like four in that box set. I think there's 4 tunes where he plays alto.
Okay.
Now, he sounds like the Coltrane that you know,
right,
but just playing alto. But it's like he has even more facility or something. It's like the horn is like, less metal, so it's just more speed or something,
Yeah.
But it still totally sounds like Train. I mean, even the way that he cries in certain ranges of the instrument. I mean, you hear all of that stuff on the alto. It's not like when he played alto before. The Train started on clarinet, and then he switched to alto.
Absolutely.
And then when he was on alto, he goes through this period where he loves Charlie Parker. Matter of fact, he played in one of the same bands that Parker was in.
Wow.
And so he's playing, he loves Parker. He sounds exactly like Charlie Parker, more than Charlie Parker. He switches to tenor, and of course Dexter, which is a pretty direct transference of Parker to tenor, including the really edgy sound. Right? Dexter's the first guy that had that kind of sound. And of course you can hear how Coltrane is influenced by that sound,
Yeah, no one before Micah. You're right.
That's right. Everybody before Dexter on tenor is like kind of voo kind of guys.
Like even less kind of middle.
Yeah, so you listen to Train when he switches to tenor, like early 50s, and he sounds more like Dexter than Dexter.
Wow.
Like you listen to it, it's like, oh, this has got to be Dexter. No, right. It's Coltrane. Right. So I was saying that to say that previously when he played alto, he was still kind of finding himself, and he was using Charlie Parker to sort of develop his language, right? And then, but this time period, in this Prestige period, he sounds like Train. He's Train. He's Coltrane, right? Yeah. But he's just playing alto. Yeah. And it's really incredible. Yeah. But by listening as much as possible, that's going to accelerate development, right?
Yeah.
And you've heard this frequently, this whole idea of documenting.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, when you're going to recording, and you got to document,
right?
And recording as this is what I sounded like in 2021 in January. Yeah. 2021. This is what I sounded like in, November of 2021. This is what I sounded like, so you can go to those time periods and say, oh, what was happening, and how often do you listen back to stuff that's like really old?
Not as often as I should. I remember going back. I remember going back to a high school thing and being like, "Wow, I miss playing like this. Like this was really fresh," And yeah, there are a few gigs that I did when I was younger that were really special that I still have on my phone that I go back to every now and then. But yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like for me, and I think for most people, because if you're constantly trying to improve, then if you're spending a lot of time practicing, then there'll be quite a bit of difference between the way you sound now from the way that you sounded even a few months ago. Right? So now if you try to go back a few years, then it's like, I remember there's a recording. I'm playing Autumn Leaves. It's a solo saxophone thing. It's on my YouTube channel. It's one of the videos that a lot of people. It's got a lot of views, and someone transcribed it and sent me the transcription and stuff. And it's a really accurate transcription. Now I listened to that and I'm like, okay. when I listen to it now, there are some notes that I'm playing out of tune. Right?
Yeah.
And I'm very aware of those notes that are being played out of tune as I'm listening to it, right?
All right.
So it's almost distracting, like, for me to listen to it. And I think that there's some good things that are happening. I think my horn maybe needed to be serviced, because some of the notes in the bottom of the horn, I'm fighting the horn a little bit more than I would want to.
Right.
So there's stuff like that. So when I listen back, I'm hearing all of that.
Right.
I'm not necessarily hearing the music per se.
Right.
You know, and part of that, I think, is because I think I've trained myself to listen, you know, and be like really hard on myself, and maybe I'm too hard on myself at times.
Yeah.
But
I mean, man, I guess the question is, the only way to be hard on yourself is if you have a goal, and then what is the goal, right? Like, what is the sound that you want? And that can get really tricky too. Like,
yes,
because it's not it isn't necessarily like, you know, when you're young, you want to sound like other people, and then eventually you start realizing you have tendencies, and you have to work with your tendencies, and they may not be like. I realized that my idea of who I am musically and in every other way isn't always on par with who I am. And like, it's like, okay, let's accept what my musical tendencies are that I wouldn't have chosen. And, you know, so it's, you know, there's this kind of dialogue, you know, between what you want and what's happening. I can't remember what that had to do with what you said. It had something to do with what you said.
No, that's all right. I hear it. No, I hear how it relates.
Yeah.
I mean, this whole sort of deconstructing yourself and trying to, you know, make yourself anew every day, trying to, you know, better yourself. And, you know, as you said, you know, how can you be hard on yourself if you don't have a goal, you know, or you need a goal for that. You need to have an idea of where you're going. And these are the kind of sort of introspective thoughts that an artist has,
right,
that you must have.
Yeah. And then
or it's like, what are you doing? Like, what's the
other
point?
thing is, like, you know, when my album came out, I talked to a few pianists, right? And I was also talking to a bunch of pianists before the album came, the Tide last year. And what I started noticing is that their favorite parts of the album was when I sounded the most like them. Like, that happened a lot. And I was like, why does this happen? And I started realizing that pianists like when other pianists sound like them, which is counterintuitive because we all think we're super critical. But actually, it makes sense. After a while, you know, we play what we like. And when we hear those ideas from someone else, like, it's like, oh, yeah, you like those ideas, I like them too. So I realized that was like,
this is a point that I make frequently, and that is that if you don't like what you sound like, then what are you doing to fix that?
right.
Because ultimately you should like what you sound like.
Yeah.
And Hubert Laws has this rather there's no new melodies, there's no new music. It's just we're basically collecting what's already there and sort of reorganizing it. He has this kind of thought on music, and
I 100% agree with you.
I think and I think I have the same kind of thought. So really what it is that we're all sort of listening to certain, we're listening, and our personality causes us to gravitate to certain kinds of sounds, certain kind of lines, certain aspects, of the music.
Kind of people too. Like, right. I found, like, the people I'm influenced by, when I meet them, like, we are both surprised at how similar we are. Like, and it can be personality. I think it's also cultural, like, you find people gravitating to people of the same culture, same background, same person. Yeah. for sure. I 100% agree.
Absolutely. And so yeah, if you don't like what you sound like, then you need to be in the process of figuring out what it is that you need to do so that you can start liking what you sound like. I like what I sound like.
Right. Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that I'm perfect. I mean, I'm constantly tweaking. I've got stuff to work on, but it almost sounds like, when you say it out loud, it almost sounds like a little like you're egotistical or something to say, "Hey, I like what I sound like," but it's not egotistical at all.
It's not.
I'm trapped in here. Yeah, I don't have a choice.
Yeah.
I don't have a choice.
We talked about this before. Didn't we talk about this? I remember you saying this.
Maybe, or maybe what it is that we like some of the same things. So that you're,
yeah.
But I'm trapped in here, and so I must see things through my own perspective. I don't have a choice,
right?
And so I can either try to develop things in a way that is pleasing or not. I mean, that's pretty much the choices that we have.
Yeah. And there's definitely a good choice.
Right. That's a better choice than saying, well.
Yeah. I remember you seeing, because, I'm a believer, and at one point I'm a believer, but I'm also a very naturally skeptical person. Mm-hmm. So I went through this year-long phase where every day it felt like I was having like a crisis, and I was reading a bunch of books about faith, and I was like, stressing out. And eventually I kind of came to this point where I realized I'm never, ever going to have an objective perspective. Like, cause everyone talks about you are kind of defined by how you grew up. And I was like, no, I can't. I have to escape that. I have to be objective. I have to find the right answer to the questions and I was just like, that is never going to happen. I just have to trust whoever I think I can trust, and whatever I think I can trust, whatever sources I have access to, whatever people I have access to, and it's going to be limited, and that's how I have to live my life. So yeah, just thinking about how objectivity is impossible. That's something that's been,
this age-old philosophical quest, know thyself. That might be the hardest thing to do, actually. See, because if you think about it, other people have an advantage over you in knowing you, because they can at least see you from different angles. They can see you from different perspectives. We cannot see ourselves from different perspectives. We're locked in here, right? And this is so this is why we need people. This is why we need other people. We need other people to provide a view of our blind spots, and our blind spots are significant.
Right. Because if there isn't anyone else, then how do we know there's a blind spot? Like, it could just not be there.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So, fortunately, we have music. I think music is one of these great ways that there's been a lot of great music recorded. We can consult recordings. We can talk to folks, like-minded folks. We can play in band situations where we have a particular job to do and other people are depending on us to do that job well. Yeah. We can compose, we can improvise, we can do all of these things. And with other people having various degrees of interaction with it, it's actually one of the maybe more efficient ways to actually try to learn who you actually are, to know yourself.
Wow, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, most people don't have that sort of constant reevaluation of themselves. Most people get to a certain age And it's like, well, I got my career, I got my family, I got whatever, and sure, they're going to deal with, they're going to struggle with certain things, but the music thing, the music journey is like this constant, it's this constant sort of reevaluation and seeing you from different angles, and forcing you to reinvent yourself and to adapt and all of these things.
Yeah, and adapt to the times, adapt to changing environment, to adapt to everything. Yeah.
All right, man. Well, do you have anything? I mean, I tried to give you a chance to plug some stuff, but you might have some other things you want to plug. Are you teaching lessons, and how are you teaching lessons?
Yes, I'm teaching lessons, and I'm looking for students. If you're watching, hit me up. You all really should get in touch with this cat. This is an incredible pianist. This is one of the great piano players living today. Yeah. I got nothing to plug, man. Just I'll let you know when I do. Got nothing.
Well, what I'll do is I'll put a link to your, to get in touch with you, social media or whatever, in the description to the video, so that people, if they're into it, they can get in touch with you.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, this is really fun, man. Thank you for having me, man.
Yeah. Now, are you doing these lessons like online? It's virtual lessons?
Yeah, it's Zoom. I haven't really done person lessons since it started.
Yeah. I know that some people are starting to, relax with some of whatever and starting to do more things in person with folks.
I've always been a hermit in Ohio, and then in New York I go crazy. That's kind of how I live.
All right, man. God bless you.
Yeah, you too. Have a good night.
Have a good one.